In the endless darkness before the first dawn, a discordant note rings through the symphony of creation. Melkor, mightiest of the Ainur, clenches his fists as the music of Iluvatar unfolds around him, a harmony he refuses to accept. Where others see beauty, he sees chains. Where they hear order, he hears tyranny. This is no mere disagreement. It is the spark that will ignite the first war of the world. With every passing moment, his pride curdles into something darker, something hungrier. He will not follow. He will not obey. He will remake the song in his own image, even if it means tearing the very fabric of Arda apart. This is the moment the first Dark Lord is born, not in fire or battle, but in the quiet rebellion of a god who believed himself greater than the Creator. And as his whisper of defiance grows into a roar, the fate of all things elven kingdoms not yet built, human hearts not yet beating, battles not yet fought, hangs in the balance. For when a being of such power chooses darkness, the world itself must brace for the storm to come. The newborn world of Arda was still raw, its lands unshaped, its waters untamed, and into this unformed beauty came Melkor, now no longer just a rebellious spirit, but a force of corruption made manifest. Where the Valor labored to bring light and order, he brought ruin. His footsteps scorched the earth, his breath poisoned the air, and wherever he passed, the very springs of life darkened at his touch. Rivers that should have run clear turned sluggish and bitter. Trees that should have stretched toward the sky twisted inward, gnarled and blackened, as if recoiling from his presence. And then came the mountains, not rising in majesty like the peaks the Valor would later raise, but jagged and cruel, jutting from the earth like broken teeth. These were the Iron Mountains, Morgoth's fortress, a realm of shadow where no light could penetrate. Behind their towering walls, he gathered his strength, feeding the land's corruption, twisting its essence until even the stones seemed to whisper his name. The Valor could not ignore such defilement. Led by Manwë, the wisest and most powerful among them, they marched against him, their presence bright enough to set the skies ablaze. They demanded his surrender, his repentance, but Morgoth was no longer a being to be reasoned with. He had become something darker, a god of ruin cloaked in stolen majesty. And so, instead of facing them in open battle, he slipped into the shadows, retreating just enough to escape their wrath, while leaving behind tendrils of malice woven into the land itself. This was not defeat. It was a patient, venomous strategy. For every step the Valor took to heal the world, Morgoth planted a seed of future strife, whispering lies to the creatures of the earth, twisting the minds of the weak-willed, ensuring that even in his absence, his influence would fester. The Valor, though mighty, could not foresee the depth of his deceit, and so the first great confrontation ended not with victory, but with a quiet, simmering menace, a promise that the war for Arda had only just begun. Script segment: the Valor had shaped Arda with care, filling it with light and life, until Morgoth's hand struck like a dagger in the dark. His malice had festered for ages, but now it erupted in a single, devastating act. The two lamps, Iluvatar and Ormel, stood as pillars of radiance, their glow bathing the world in warmth. With a fury born of envy, Morgoth tore them down. The crash of their ruin shook the earth, and darkness swallowed the land, thick and suffocating, as if the very air had turned to ash. The Valor, hearts heavy with grief, saw no choice but to withdraw. They gathered their strength and fled to Valinor, a realm beyond the reach of Morgoth's shadow. There, they would forge a new sanctuary, bathed in the light of the trees of Valinor, but their absence left Middle-earth defenseless. And so, Morgoth claimed the darkened world as his own, his laughter echoing through the hollowed valleys, his rule unchallenged. Yet in the silence of the ruins, something stirred. The Elves, the firstborn of Ilúvatar, awoke under the vast expanse of starlight, their eyes unaccustomed to brightness, yet unbroken by despair. They whispered words of defiance in the hushed tongues of their infancy. Though Morgoth believed them weak, these early elves saw not darkness, but stars' tiny flames of hope in the endless night. And where he expected submission, they offered resistance. Slowly, quietly, the scattered tribes began to gather. They learned to hide from his hunters, to raid the land's hidden paths. Some even dared to steal back what Morgoth had taken, rescuing their kin from his dungeons, vanishing into the forests like shadows. The Dark Lord, drunk on victory, barely noticed at first, but the embers of rebellion were already lit, and no tyrant, no matter how powerful, could extinguish them forever. Morgoth's wrath burned hotter than the furnaces of Angband, as the whispers of elven rebellion reached his ears. These firstborn of Ilúvatar, fair and free beneath the stars, refused to bow, so he would remake them in his image. Deep in the blackest pits of his fortress, he seized those who dared defy him, weaving torment into their very flesh. Their luminous eyes dimmed, their graceful forms twisted into hunched, snarling beasts. The Orcs were born, not a race, but a desecration, a living testament to his hatred of all things pure. Where once there had been song, now there was only the clatter of crude weapons and guttural cries echoing through the tunnels. Yet Morgoth was not content with corruption alone. He called to the darkest spirits, the fallen Maiar, who shared his malice, and bound them to his will. Balrogs, wreathed in flame and shadow, emerged from the depths, their whips cracking like thunder. Werewolves, their eyes glinting with unnatural hunger, prowled at his command. Even the great dragons, still slumbering in the earth, stirred at his whisper, their scales yet soft, but their hearts already poisoned with his greed. This was no mere army, it was a plague of nightmares, each creature a shard of his own fury-given form. And then came Fëanor, the brightest of the Noldor. His spirit burned with a fire even Morgoth could not extinguish. Where others saw despair, Fëanor saw purpose. Where Morgoth sought to break, Fëanor would create crafting wonders beyond even the Valor's dreams. The Silmarils, 3 jewels hallowed with the light of the trees of Valinor, shimmered in his hands, their radiance a silent challenge to the Dark Lord's dominion. Morgoth coveted them, yes, but more than that, he feared them. For in Fëanor's brilliance, he saw the one thing his power could not corrupt, a will as unyielding as his own. The shadows thickened, the winds howled with anticipation, and Morgoth's legions gathered like storm clouds on the horizon. But this time, the darkness would not go unchallenged. Fëanor's oath echoed across the land, a vow sworn in fire and blood. His line would endure, his defiance would outlast even the ages. And though Morgoth grinned in the depths of his throne, his fingers tightening around the hilt of his black sword, he could not shake the gnawing truth. Every act of cruelty only forged another enemy who would not break. The war for Middle-earth had found its champion. The Silmarils blazed in Morgoth's grasp, twin fires of agony and triumph, searing through his blackened hands. No stolen treasure had ever burned so cruelly, their holy light tormenting the flesh of the thief, even as he reveled in their possession. Through the shadows of Ahriman he fled, the very air howling in his wake, leaving behind the golden shores of Valinor for the war-torn wilds of Middle-earth. Behind him, the discordant echoes of Fëanor's oath rang like a death knell. Not even the Valor could unhear those words now. Fëanor's wrath was a storm given form. Where Morgoth slithered through darkness, the Noldor prince burned with a fury that outshone the sun. He would have his vengeance not with whispers, but with steel and fire. Yet Morgoth had planned for this. His greatest weapon was never brute force, but the rod of distrust he sowed like seeds in fertile soil. The Dark Lord's laughter echoed unseen as Fëanor turned not just on him, but on his own kin. At Alqualanda, the sea turned red. The Teleri elves, innocent of any crime, stood between Fëanor and the ships he demanded, and paid the price. Swords meant for Morgoth's hordes fell upon kindred instead. The First Kinslaying shattered the Noldor's nobility, staining their exodus with a sin even the Valor could not forgive. And as the survivors sailed eastward, the wind carried whispers of Morgoth's mockery. See how easily they break themselves for me. Middle-earth, when they reached it, offered no sanctuary. Morgoth's lies had raced ahead of them, turning potential allies into wary strangers. Every step toward Angband became a gauntlet of ambushes and betrayal, each mile paved with the corpses of those who trusted too much, or too little. The Noldor, once the brightest of elves, now wandered a labyrinth of their own making, their quest for vengeance twisting into something darker. Yet Morgoth, watching from his throne of obsidian, found no comfort in their suffering. The Silmarils still burned him, their light a constant rebuke. Every scream of the Noldor, every drop of spilled elven blood, only fed the gnawing void in his spirit. For all his power, he could not silence the truth. He had not conquered the light, he had only made it his prisoner. And prisoners, as he knew well, have a way of escaping. The foundations of Angband groaned as Morgoth's will press down upon them, its obsidian towers stretching higher, its pits plunging deeper into the earth's burning core. This was no mere fortress, it was a declaration. Every iron spike, every blood-stained parapet, whispered the same message, "Here, I am eternal." Within those blackened halls, armies stirred like embers in a forge. Orcs sharpened crude blades, their numbers swelling with each passing hour. Balrogs prowled the shadows, their fiery breath coiling in the stagnant air. And beneath the mountains, something vast shifted in restless slumber, wings folded tight, scales still soft, but growing harder by the day. Yet Morgoth's true mastery lay not in force alone, but in deception. From the gates of Angband strode Sauron, once a servant of light, now a sculptor of ruin. Where Morgoth ruled through terror, Sauron worked in subtler hues. He slipped into elven camps as a whisper, a murmured doubt, a well-placed lie. Why should the Valor dictate your fate? He sighed to the weary. Why should Fëanor's pride cost you your kin? With every word, cracks spread in the Noldor's unity, just as Morgoth had planned. Then came the night, the stars themselves wept fire. The battle under stars erupted without warning. The Noldor, led by Fëanor in all his brilliant fury, fell upon Morgoth's forces like a tempest. Swords flashed silver beneath the frigid sky. War cries echoed over the barren plains. For a moment, it seemed the tide might turn until the earth split open. Balrogs clawed their way to the surface, whips of flame lashing the air, and behind them came Glorung, first of the dragons, his golden scales still thin, but his breath already a torrent of death. The Noldor fought with desperation that bordered on madness, but even their valor could not withstand such horrors. Fëanor fell last, ringed by enemies, his body riddled with wounds. Yet as the life bled from him, his gaze never wavered from Angband's spires. Even in defeat, he spat defiance, and Morgoth, watching from his tower, felt the faintest tremor of doubt. For the Noldor had not broken, they had chosen to fight, and in that choice lay a truth the Dark Lord could never smother. Light, once kindled, does not easily fade. As the survivors retreated, Morgoth's laughter boomed across the battlefield, but it was too loud, too sharp, a sound less of triumph than of a king, reassuring himself his throne still stood. The elves had been driven back, yes, but their resolve burned brighter than ever, and in the east, where the stars still shone clear, a new force gathered, one not yet tainted by his lies. The war was far from over. The Noldor's vengeance formed a noose around Morgoth's throat, or so it seemed. For centuries, the elven hosts maintained their siege, their watchfires encircling Angband like a necklace of stars. Fingolfin's spears gleamed at the northern passes, while his kin held the western slopes, their vigilance unbroken. Yet Morgoth, the master of slow poison, merely waited in the depths. His spies moved like mist through elven camps, dripping whispers of envy into proud ears. Why does Fingolfin command the high ground? Why should your people bleed for Turgon's hidden city? The siege held, but its heart grew brittle. Then came the winter that refused to end. The rivers froze so deeply their songs ceased. Wolves, grown bold with hunger, prowled the picket lines. On a dawn choked with black snow, the earth itself revolted. Fissures split the plains, vomiting rivers of molten fire, the Dagor Bragollach, the battle of sudden flame. Glorung, now grown to monstrous size, led the charge, his scales impervious to arrows, his breath scouring the land to ash. Balrogs rode the inferno, their whips carving through armored ranks like parchment. And behind them, wave upon wave of orcs, no longer skulking in shadows, but howling in the open, drunk on Morgoth's promise of slaughter. The Noldor fought with the desperation of those who know extinction looms. Fingolfin's horn echoed over the carnage as he rallied the survivors, his blade shearing through foes like a sickle through rotted wheat. But for every orc that fell, 10 more clambered over its corpse. The siege lines shattered, elves scattering into the hills or fleeing to hidden Gondolin. Morgoth's laughter shook the battlefield, thick with the stench of burning hair and charred bone. Yet in his triumph, the Dark Lord committed his first true error. As his armies pursued the broken Noldor, he let his gaze linger too long on the fallen. The Silmarils at his chest pulsed not with his victory, but with a light that seared his flesh anew. For high in the mountains, a single elf king still stood. Fingolfin, his armor in ruins, his people scattered, rode alone toward Angband's gates, not to flee, not to plead, but to challenge a god to single combat. The earth trembled as Morgoth emerged, not with the calculated cruelty of a strategist, but with the frothing rage of a beast provoked. His mace groaned, cratered the ground with each step. Yet for all his might, he could not stifle the truth that gnawed at him even as their duel began. This was no broken foe begging for mercy. This was defiance incarnate. And defiance, once kindled, could not be wholly extinguished, not by fire, not by force, not even by the death of kings. Gondolin rose from the mountains like a dream of stone and silver, its white towers untouched by time, its hidden valleys brimming with light. For centuries, Morgoth's spies had groped blindly at the edges of its enchantments, unable to pierce the veil of Turgon's magic, but no spell lasts forever. The Dark Lord's patience was a slow, gnawing thing, and in the end, it was not brute force that shattered the city's defenses, but the poison of betrayal. Mieglin, Turgon's own nephew, had long seethed in the shadow of the king's favor. His hands shaped the city's finest metalwork, but his heart twisted with envy, for Idril's love, for Tuor's honor, for all the things Morgoth's whispers promised him. When the Dark Lord's agents finally snared him beyond the mountains, the bargain was swift. The secrets of Gondolin's hidden pathways in exchange for dominion over its ruins. Dawn broke red over the Echoriath as Morgoth's legions slithered through the passes Mieglin had betrayed. Balrogs scaled the walls like spiders of flame, their whips cracking the morning quiet. Dragons, grown vast as storms, bathed the streets in fire. The elves fought with the desperation of those who know no retreat is possible, arrows clattering against scales, swords ringing against iron, but the tide was relentless. Yet even in the slaughter, fate wove a thread of light. Tuor and Idril, forewarned by visions of doom, shepherded their people through the city's secret escape. Their son, Elendil, barely more than a child, clutched his mother's hand as they fled through tunnels choked with smoke, the cries of Gondolin dying behind them. Above them, the sky burned. Ahead, the sea whispered a road none had yet dared to take. Morgoth, enthroned in Angband, reveled in the reports of Gondolin's fall. Another jewel of the Noldor ground, to dust beneath his heel. But as the cheers of his generals echoed through the halls, his fingers strayed to the Silmarils at his breast, and their light, ever unwelcome, ever undimmed, seared his flesh anew. For in the shadows of his triumph scurried a boy who would one day sail beyond the world's edge, carrying a plea even the Dark Lord could not silence. Victory had never tasted so hollow. Elendil's ship, Fingolfin, cut through the star-strewn sky like a blade of silver, a speck of light against the infinite dark. His voyage had taken him beyond the edges of the world, past the shadows of despair, to the very threshold of the undying lands. And there, with the Silmaril bound to his brow like a fallen star, he did what none had dared for centuries. He knelt before the Valor and begged for mercy. Not for himself, for a world drowning in blood and fire. The silence that followed was heavier than any mountain. The Valor had turned their backs on Middle-earth after the Noldor's rebellion, but Elendil's words, raw with the grief of fathers who buried their children, of mothers who whispered lullabies over empty cradles, pierced their resolve. The time for judgment had come. What followed was not a battle, but an unraveling. The war of wrath did not creep in, with whispered strategies or patient sieges. It descended like the fist of heaven, the Valor's host, led by the wrath of Ernwe, herald of Manwe, swept across the land with a force that cracked the earth itself. Towers of flame erupted where their armies trod, not from destruction, but from the very air igniting with their fury. Morgoth's legions, vast as they were, shattered like glass before them. Orcs withered in the radiance of the Valor's presence. Balrogs, once lords of terror, met their end in duels that left the skies black with smoke and the plains littered with charred wings. And then came the dragons. Glorung's brood, now grown to monstrous maturity, rose in a last desperate swarm. Their scales, hardened through centuries of dark sorcery, turned blades like rain. But the Valor had brought more than swords. Eagles, vast as storm clouds, dove from the heights, their talons tearing into winged serpents with primordial fury. The greatest of the dragons, Ankalagan the Black, fell not to blade or spell, but to the weight of his own ruin, his body crashing onto Angband's spires, reducing the fortress to a tomb of rubble and melted iron. Morgoth, for the first time in all his ages of tyranny, knew fear. He had no grand speech, no final act of defiance. When the Valor cornered him in the ruins of his throne room, he was no longer a god, just a trembling shadow, his once mighty form diminished by the theft of the Silmarils' light. They did not kill him. Death would have been a mercy. Instead, they severed his hands, chained him with metal forged from the ruins of his own crown, and cast him through the door of night, into the void beyond the world, where not even his whispers could poison the winds. Yet as the dust settled and the sun at last broke through the smoke, a hush fell over the survivors. The war was won, the darkness lifted, but the scars remained, in the broken lands, in the hollowed eyes of those who had endured, in the weight of the 3 Silmarils, now lost to fire and sea and sky. Morgoth was gone, but his shadow, as all great shadows do, lingered in the echoes. The War of Wrath had ended, but the world would never be the same. Middle-earth lay gasping, its mountains sundered, its plains drowned beneath churning seas, its westernmost lands wrenched forever beneath the waves. Where Angband once stood, only a gaping wound remained, its foundations choked with the bones of dragons and the rusted armor of fallen elves. Yet for all the devastation, something unexpected stirred in the ruins: hope. The Silmarils, those radiant jewels that had fueled so much bloodshed, now burned in places no hand could reach. One was cast into the earth's fiery heart, another swallowed by the sea, and the third set aloft as a star, Elendil's beacon, a reminder that even stolen light could guide the lost. Though Morgoth had coveted them unto madness, their final fate mocked his hunger. They had become something purer than treasures, legends, yet shadows linger where great evils fall. Amid the rubble, a single figure slithered away unnoticed. Sauron, last of Morgoth's lieutenants. Once a smith of subtle craft, now a master of disguises, he shed his armor like a serpent shedding skin. No grand proclamations heralded his survival. He moved as silence moves, weaving himself into the cracks of a broken world. The elves, weary with victory, did not yet see the pattern in the scattered raids on their borders, the whispers of new cults in the south. For darkness does not die, it adapts. In the east, where Morgoth's influence had run deepest, tribes of men still knelt before altars stained with ash. In the ruins of fallen kingdoms, Treasure hunters uncovered relics, pulsing with forgotten spells, and in the hollow pits of Mount Doom, fires that had cooled for centuries began, ever so faintly, to stir. The Valor had cast Morgoth into the void, but his shadow clung to Middle-earth like a stubborn stain, not as a god now, but as an idea that Sauron, patient as poison, would nurture in secret. The First Age had ended, the wars of gods were over, but the long game of kings and rings had only just begun. The air over Middle-earth grew quieter in the years after Morgoth's fall, but the silence was not peace, only the hush that follows a storm. The Elves, those who had survived the long centuries of war, walked through forests where the trees still bore scars from dragon fire, along shores where the waves whispered names of the drowned. They did not celebrate. How could they? Every victory had come layered in loss, yet in their sorrow, something unexpected took root: wisdom. Morgoth's legacy was not just the wastelands he left behind, but the lessons etched into the very soil. His hunger for dominion had twisted not only flesh and stone, but the nature of conflict itself. Where once elves had fought with gleaming swords and proud banners, they now saw the cost of pride unchecked. The Noldor, who had crossed icy hells for vengeance, understood too late that Morgoth's greatest weapon was the division he sowed between kin. The Sindar, who had hidden in twilight realms, learned that no refuge lasts forever. Even the Valor, in their distant bliss, carried the weight of their delayed mercy, and yet the light had not been extinguished. In the west, the undying land still shone, a distant glow on the horizon. In the east, elven smiths crafted anew, not jewels of war but tools of healing. The Silmarils were gone, yes, but their light had scattered into the stars, into the sea, into the hands of those who still dared to hope. The world was broken, but broken things could be remade, not as they were, perhaps, but as they might yet become. Morgoth's shadow stretched long, but it was no longer a shroud. It was a warning, a reminder that darkness thrives not just in fire and sword, but in the spaces between trust, in the silence where understanding should have been. The elves, weary as they were, would not forget, and in that memory, sharp as grief, stubborn as starlight, lay the first seed of renewal. Script segment. Even as the centuries rolled onward, Morgoth's name never truly faded. It became a whisper in the dark, a story told by firelight to wide-eyed children and solemn warriors alike. In the halls of the Elves, lore masters recounted his betrayals like a litany of caution, their voices hushed as they spoke of the first Dark Lord, who sought to twist creation itself. Among men, his legacy was simpler but no less potent, a symbol of ambition turned to ash, of power that devours its wielder. Yet the tales were not only of his cruelty. They were also of the ones who stood against him. Fingolfin's duel beneath the blackened sky, Lúthien's song that shook the towers of Angband, the stubborn light of the Silmarils that even Morgoth could not fully corrupt. These stories did more than warn, they reminded. For every act of destruction, there had been defiance. For every shadow, a spark refused to die. And so, though Morgoth was gone, his presence lingered, not as a specter, but as a lesson etched into the bones of the world. Kings measured their rule against his tyranny. Smiths hesitated before crafting wonders, remembering the pride that doomed the Noldor. Even the Valor, in their timeless wisdom, bore the weight of their choices during his reign. The past was not forgotten. It was a mirror held up to each new age, asking silently, will you repeat these mistakes or rise above them? In hidden libraries and around campfires, in the laments of minstrels and the oaths of warriors, the echoes of that ancient war endured. Not as a dirge, but as a testament to the cost of unchecked power, yes, but also to the resilience of those who refused to kneel. Morgoth's shadow stretched long, but so too did the light of those who had faced him. And in that balance, the world found its way forward. Script segment. The fall of Morgoth did not erase the marks he left upon the world. They simply took new forms, etched into the lives of those who came after. Men who had never seen his face still carried his legacy in the cautionary tales passed down through generations. Elves who had fought beneath his shadow bore the weight of their choices like unseen scars. Even the dwarves, whose halls had echoed with the ringing of picks against stone, remembered the darkness that once seeped into the roots of their mountains. Yet from this shared history, something unexpected emerged. The races of Middle-earth, once divided by suspicion or pride, found a fragile unity in the lessons Morgoth had unwittingly taught them. The elves, though diminished, became stewards of memory, preserving accounts of his atrocities so none would forget the cost of unchecked power. Men, ever restless and ambitious, wove his story into their laws and legends, a warning against the lure of tyranny. And the dwarves, behind their towering gates, forged not just weapons but symbols of endurance. Their craftsmanship, a defiance against the ruin he had once sought to spread. In the quiet moments between wars, alliances formed that would have been unthinkable in earlier ages. Elven lords sat with human kings, their councils lit by the same torches. Dwarven smiths traded secrets with mortal craftsmen, their hands shaping metal into art rather than instruments of war. Even the land itself seemed to heal, forests regrowing where fire had raged, rivers running clear where once they had been choked with ash. But darkness, as ever, did not sleep. It waited. The descendants of Morgoth's servants lurked in the unseen corners of the world, their whispers curling through taverns and throne rooms alike. Some men, hungry for power, dredged up forbidden knowledge from forgotten ruins. A few elves, haunted by loss, turned their ears toward songs that promised dominion over fate. And in the deep places, where even dwarves dared not dig, things older than kingdoms stirred at the call of a master long gone, but not wholly forgotten. The world had changed, yet the battle remained the same, not with armies clashing in open war, but in the choices of those who remembered, and those who chose to look away. The true testament to Morgoth's defeat was not just in the ruins he left behind, but in the hands that rebuilt. Every act of creation, every alliance forged, every child raised on stories of courage over cruelty, was a strike against his shadow. The Dark Lord had sought to break the world's spirit, but in the end, he had only shown it how to stand unbroken. The mantle of darkness never rests, it merely finds new hands to bear it. As the dust of Morgoth's fall settled, his most cunning servant stepped from the ruins with a smile sharp enough to cut history in two. Sauron, once a smith of divine craft, now wore his corruption like a crown. Where Morgoth had raged like a wildfire, Sauron moved like a slow poison, seeping into the cracks of a wounded world. His first act was not a war cry, but a whisper, promises of order to the war-weary, secrets to the power-hungry, and to all, the sweet lie that strength could be seized without sacrifice. Yet Middle-earth was no longer the unbroken realm Morgoth had first corrupted. The elves, though diminished, kept watch with eyes that had seen the cost of complacency. In Lindon, Gil-galad's court became a beacon of vigilance, his spear tipped not just with steel, but with hard-won wisdom. The dwarves of Khazad-dûm, their halls ringing with renewed industry, traded not only in mithril, but in warnings etched into stone. And among men, scattered tribes that had once cowered in Morgoth's shadow now stood taller, their chieftains passing down tales of betrayal like heirlooms of caution. Sauron's greatest miscalculation was assuming their scars made them weak. When he forged the rings of power fair and flawless as morning dew, he thought their allure irresistible. The elves, remembering the Silmarils' curse, recoiled. The dwarves, stubborn as the roots of mountains, bowed to no will but their own. And men, some fell, yes, their hearts ever quick to covet. But others, like the Númenóreans who had once sailed to the edge of doom, now measured power against the ruins of drowned kingdoms. Hope flickered not in grand gestures, but in quiet defiance. A ranger tracking orcs through moonlit woods, a smith reforging broken blades into plowshares, a mother humming an old elven lullaby to her child, the notes carrying a truth Sauron could not twist. That light, once kindled, is never truly lost. The Dark Lord's shadow stretched long, but it was no longer the only shape the future could take. For every chain he forged, someone remembered how to pick locks. For every lie he spun, another scroll of truth was carefully preserved. The war against evil would never end, but neither would the stubborn, unremarkable acts of courage that kept the night at bay. Morgoth had sought to break the world's spirit, but all he'd done was teach it how to fight. Script segment. The world breathed easier after Morgoth's fall, but the air still carried traces of his poison, like a storm that had passed yet left the earth damp with lingering rain. His name became a myth, a cautionary tale passed from elder to child, but the scars of his reign shaped every age that followed. Towers that had once crumbled under dragon fire were rebuilt, not as fortresses of war, but as bastions of memory. The elves, though fewer in number, wove his story into their songs, not to glorify his darkness, but to honor those who stood against it, and stand they did. From the ashes of Morgoth's ruin rose heroes who bore no Silmarils, no divine mandate, just ordinary hands and extraordinary will. A new generation of men, untainted by the old sins of Númenor, carved kingdoms from the wilds with swords and plows. The dwarves, their halls echoing with renewed laughter, turned their craft to bridges and lanterns instead of siege engines. Even the elves, those who chose to remain, taught their children that vigilance was not the same as fear. Yet the most profound testament to Morgoth's defeat lay not in grand battles, but in quiet moments. A farmer planting seeds in soil once scorched by war. A scholar preserving scrolls that told of both triumph and folly. A smith hammering a sword into a pruning hook. Each act, small as it seemed, was a declaration. Darkness had not won. The world was not mended in a day, nor without cost, but it was mending. And then there were the stars. Elendil's Silmaril still burned in the heavens, a flicker of hope no shadow could smother. Sailors charted their courses by it. Lovers made promises under its light. To some, it was just another star, but to those who remembered, it was a reminder. not of Morgoth's theft, but of the hands that had wrested it back. The Dark Lord had sought to master all light, yet here it shone, free and untouchable, long after his chains had rusted to dust. The lesson of Morgoth's reign was never that evil could be erased. It was that it could be resisted not just by kings and warriors, but by healers, builders, and storytellers. His shadow had stretched across ages, but so too did the courage of those who refused to let it define them. The greatest victory was not his fall, but what rose in his absence, a world that knew its own strength. And so, as the Third Age dawned, the whispers of Morgoth's name grew fainter, but the light he had failed to extinguish burned all the brighter, not because it was perfect, but because it had been tested. And tested light, as any survivor could tell you, is the hardest kind to dim. The night sky over Middle-earth no longer feels like a battleground. Where once the stars seemed dimmed by the weight of Morgoth's shadow, now they blaze with quiet fierceness. Each pinprick of light, a reminder that darkness, no matter how vast, is never absolute. Elendil's Silmaril still sails its celestial path, but it is not alone. Around it, constellations forgotten during the long centuries of war have rekindled their glow, as if the heavens themselves are exhaling after ages of held breath. Morgoth's story did not end with his banishment. It calcified into warning. Parents tell their children of the Dark Lord not to frighten them, but to fortify them. This, they say, tracing the outline of a scar or the cracks in an old fortress wall, is what happens when hunger for dominion eclipses all else. His legacy is not just in the ruins he left behind, but in the hands that rebuilt them, hands that now work with a hard-earned understanding. Power unchecked by wisdom is a weapon turned inward. Yet the tale is not solely one of despair. For every citadel Morgoth shattered, a new city rose, its foundations laid with stones of memory. The Elves, though diminished, sing not just of loss, but of Lothian's courage, of Fingolfin's stand, of the 1,000 small acts of defiance that chipped away at a tyrant's throne. Men, once scattered and fearful, now forge kingdoms where laws are etched not in blood, but in the lessons of the past. Even the dwarves, their halls deeper and wiser, craft doors that open as readily as they barricade, a balance their ancestors might have envied. The true irony of Morgoth's reign lies in what he could not corrupt. The Silmarils, though lost, became something purer than he ever understood, symbols. Not of possession, but of persistence. Their light, scattered across sea, stone, and sky, whispers a truth that outlasts empires, that no darkness, however absolute it seems, can endure where even a single spark remains. And so, beneath these brighter stars, Middle-earth does more than survive. It learns, it grows, it remembers. The shadow of the first Dark Lord lingers, yes, but it no longer defines the horizon. The dawn that follows his night is not unblemished, but it is undeniably new, and in that newness there blooms a hope as stubborn as the roots of the world itself. Script segment. Morgoth's name still carries the weight of 1,000 battlefields, spoken in hushed tones across taverns and royal courts alike. But what lingers most is not his shadow, it's the stubborn light that refused to be swallowed. His tale is not just one of terror, it's a testament to resilience, proving that even the mightiest darkness can be unraveled by those who refuse to kneel. Think of the great tapestry of Middle-earth's history, forever altered by his touch. Lands sank beneath the waves, mountains rose from ruin, and entire races bore the scars of his war. Yet from that devastation emerged something unexpected: strength, tempered by wisdom. The elves, though diminished, became keepers of memory rather than vengeance. Men once fractured built kingdoms on the ashes of old betrayals. Even the land itself, once scorched and broken, learned to heal. The irony of Morgoth's reign is this: in his quest to dominate all things, he forged the very resistance that would destroy him. The Silmarils he coveted became emblems of hope, scattered beyond his grasp. The races he sought to divide discovered unity in survival, and the Valor, slow to act, ultimately proved that no tyranny is absolute, not when light endures in even the smallest hands. Now, when the wind carries whispers of his name, it is not just fear that answers. It's recognition of courage, of sacrifice, of the unbroken will that turned Cataclysm into renewal. Morgoth's fall did not erase his mark on the world, but it did something far greater. It showed that even the darkest age can give way to dawn. His legacy, then, is not just ruin. It's the indelible truth that defiance, however quiet, can shape eternity. The world remembers him not as a victor, but as a warning, one that still echoes, still teaches, and still stirs hearts to stand unbowed when shadows rise again.